All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Keenan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martin Sadler. And Martin, we've got a special guest today.
We have. It's James Gordon. James is a very, very well-known rugby league journalist, the guy who started the loverugbyleague.com website, a very successful rugby league website. I think, James, you actually sold it, hopefully quite profitably, when the right time came. And You've written quite a bit for our publications, haven't you, League Express in particular, and you had a particularly interesting article in this week's League Express reflecting on the Luke Littler story at Warrington and so on. So welcome on board, great to have you, and I think over the next hour or so we'll have a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me, nice to be here.
Great.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's just quickly talk, mate. James, when did you sell Love Rugby League? How many years ago was that? And you sort of kept writing for them after
so I sold it in the back end of 2017 to the Planet Sport Network, and then they kept me on as full-time editor up until probably the middle of 2023. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, it was. I'd run it for my whole adult life, I think, since I was 17. I set it up when I was 17, so it was quite a culture change 18 months or so ago, where I'd always had that in the background, and then no matter what I'd done in my adult life, that was always there. And it was quite a culture change when it went, but it was a good journey.
So you were really a pioneer in rugby league online, weren't you? You know, I mean, we're the old technology in a way, League Express and so on. But obviously we've branched out and gone online many years ago. But you were really a pioneer, I would say.
I'll take that, Martin. I might put that as my new Twitter bio.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the reason it came about, the whole reason it came about was I went on work experience when I was 16 at an agency in Manchester, and they had a website called forthegame.com, which covered the Premier League and the Football League. And I went there and spent a couple of weeks there, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if there was a rugby league version of this? And that was basically what inspired me to set it up. And it was weird because the idea was, at that time, I wanted to be a sports journalist. It was meant to put me in the shop window for people like Martin to see me, and then I ended up becoming almost like a rival to people like Martin. So
yeah. Yeah, no, but competition's always a great thing, you know. Let's be honest about it. But no, so just tell us a bit about your background. Are you a Widnes kid originally, or Warrington?
I'm a Warrington lad, but my dad's from Widnes and my mum's Welsh, so I'm the first line in my family who's from Warrington, if you like. And so obviously when I was a kid, my dad took me to watch Widnes. I did go to a couple of games at a couple of Super League games in the early years at Wilderspool, but my dad took me to watch Widnes, so I was a season ticket holder there. And
so who was in the Widnes team at that time that you particularly recall?
I mean, I only started going probably when I was I remember when they first got promoted to Super League, so it was like the late 90s and the early 2000s.
Well, after the fire and the great years.
As much as the World Club Challenge was in my lifetime, I can't really claim that because I think I was only one at the time.
I was there on that night, 1989, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, like the first era Widnes was in Super League was probably the first one I can remember. Jules O'Neill, obviously his son's playing for
brilliant
for Lee now.
And playing very well as well.
Yeah, so that was they were my, Jason Dimitri was a player who did good things for Widnes around that time, and that was my first sort of taste of it all, and then got the bug, I suppose.
Yeah. That's interesting. Actually, you mentioned Jason Dimitri. He's just got a new coaching job at Westfield Sports High, I think, in Sydney, which is interesting, isn't it? Because I'd love to see him coaching in this country after his stint at South Sydney.
Yeah, he's always. I mean, the Widnes coaching job's come up quite a few times in recent years, and there's always fans who mention him as a potential candidate. He actually probably made more of a name for himself in Super League away from Widnes, but the Widnes fans do remember him.
The Wakefield fans remember him very fondly because he played a fantastic part in Wakefield avoiding relegation in 2006 when they had that incredible run under John Keir, final 6 games of the season, and Jason was outstanding as the captain of the side in those days. And so I think a lot of people in this country have quite a soft spot for him, don't they?
always find that with players that come over here, if they do a good job, the fans never forget the name, do they?
No, that's right. That's right.
Talk us through some of your highlights, mate, in your time covering the sport. Are there any key moments that stick out to you in your memory?
Obviously, the new camp. Went to the game at the new camp, the Wigan game there. That was it was just a bit of a surreal experience, that one, to be honest. I'd been the year before on a stag do to Barcelona and done like the stadium tour at the new camp and sat there, and never in a million years thought I'd be, obviously you dream of doing a Champions League game for Barcelona there, but then the following year I just happened to be there working in the press box and behind the scenes there. That was good. We went to Carcassonne for the French Magic weekend one year and watched. I think there was 6 games over the weekend, and that was myself and Drew went, and that was a really good experience. We went over there, we spent some time with Carcassonne with the team there, and it just opens your eyes to, everyone talks about an M62 sport all the time as a negative thing, and we can have an endless debate on that, but to have gone over to France and to seen all these teams and people who are actually doing this thing, and you think, we need to make more of this because it is actually happening.
Of course, yes, and not turn our back on the French as well. And it's interesting you mentioned the Nou Camp Stadium, because in a sense that was almost an early forerunner of going to Las Vegas, wasn't it? So, it's the same, it gives you the same sort of image almost, and yet the trouble is we do it once and then it doesn't happen again. That's the difference, isn't it, with us? They're doing it for 5 years in Vegas. The Catalans went to Barcelona for 1 year and then not again.
And I think part of the issue as well is the same with Magic Weekend. I think sometimes is that I have my own opinion on Magic Weekend, but it's like has it developed stuff around it that it wanted to when it first set out? The whole idea was, do you put it somewhere where you can then build some foundations and build some teams around it? And it just doesn't feel like that's what's happened. And then, in my opinion, the event on its own strong enough to warrant doing it? I'm not really sure that it is. If you can't have that bit around it that's developing the game, and because what's the point in getting someone interested in the game who's miles and miles away if they've not got a team to follow on a regular basis?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And of course, if the Magic Weekend ends up at Elland Road Stadium, what's the attraction of that? It's difficult to get too enthusiastic about it, isn't it?
No, absolutely. But we've got a whole heap of topics to talk into that will look at the game and the marketing around it, especially with some of the columns you two have done on League Express this week. We will get to those a little bit later, but how about we take a look at the weekend's matches that took place. On Thursday night we had Hull KR defeating Wakefield 14 points to 12.
It all ended with Max Jowett missing the conversion to Wakefield's final try, didn't it? And that was obviously disappointing for Wakefield fans, and great for Hull KR. I mean, it's interesting that Hull KR have played 2 games this season so far, won them both by 1 point, Golden Point, and 2 points at Wakefield, and both games were in front of sellout crowds. Admittedly, not big crowds because the stadiums are pretty limited in size, but good for them. And I think Wakefield have shown that they're going to be pretty credible competitors this year in Super League.
Yeah, you have to say. I mean, I'm sure they'll be disappointed to have lost that, but to have picked up 1 win from the first 2, they've been more than competitive. They've got Saints this week, haven't they? Which would be a good test for them. I think Darryl Powell's proved that he can get a team, maybe an unfancied team, if you like. He can get them punching well above the weight, and Wakefield have got ambitions now, haven't they? It looks great. Look great on the TV as well.
Yes.
The new stand. I went there a couple of times last season. It looks, it makes such a big difference, that investment that they've made.
It does. And they've got some pretty good players. I mean, young Oliver Pratt looks like a potentially really smart young centre, doesn't he? He's bursting through this year after showing so much promise, in the last couple of years, mainly playing for the reserves, of course. And Max Jowett, we made him the Albert Goldthorpe Rookie of the Year. I think it was 2016, quite a long time ago now. But, his career seemed to almost stall. But I think, if you look at him now, he's had 2 outstanding games in Super League this year.
No, he certainly proved he belongs in the top league.
Absolutely.
But the other big news, Mikey Lewis left the game with a looked like a pretty bad ankle injury, but
although
they've cleared him of any.
It's not as bad as it looked. Apparently, it's a sprain rather than a broken ankle, and I think he'll miss this week's game. But should be. I mean, they play Salford, don't they, this week? But he will be back probably fairly soon after that, I think.
Yeah.
Which is a massive relief for them.
And I think Tyrone May, I think he's been named in the extended squad for this weekend, but there's still a little bit of doubt about whether he'll return this week as well. Yeah. So a bit of a selection.
Well, they've recalled Danny Richardson, haven't they, from Huddersfield?
Yeah. So fingers crossed Mikey can heal up. Those ankles, they can be quite troublesome sometimes. You know, they swell up when you do bad sprains. I've done a few on the dance floor, on the nightclubs and on the footy pitch myself. So
well, they've got to make sure they don't bring him back too soon, haven't they? But actually, Hull KR, it's quite interesting because Hull KR, last season, they probably had fewer injury problems than any other club in Super League. And of course it showed, didn't it? Because they came second and got to the grand final. And they had the previous year Salford were in that position where they had very few injuries, and it sort of shows, doesn't it? Few injuries means that you play well consistently, and clubs that suffer loads of injuries tend to pay the price for them.
Best ability is availability. So moving on to Friday's matchups, we had Warrington 18 points defeating Catalans 12.
Well, James, you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough game. I thought it was low on quality at times. There was conversations after the game about the slow ruck speed, which, to be fair, Sam Burgess he said he didn't mind. I think there's an attitude that the referees are refereeing the ruck a little bit different this year, and it means it's a slower game. I mean, people can criticise the officials for that, but ultimately, I'm a bit like all the coaches are coaching the players to slow the ruck down. So ultimately, the consequence is that's what you're going to get. I think Catalans Park actually, I thought they did pretty well. They were getting plenty of offloads in. I think the trouble that the Dragons had, they just didn't have any strike power when they got the ball free. They just didn't seem to have the players to spread it wide.
And that's been the problem for a couple of years, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've got Ben Garcia's playing hooker now. Is that the best? Is that his best position?
No,
I'm
not necessarily.
Sure. And I think that's going to be a real problem for them, because certainly in the middle, I thought they were fine, but it was just they just couldn't transition them offloads into something else. I mean, in terms of Warrington, I think Warrington under Sam Burgess they've looked capable of. They just get in the arm wrestler games, and they don't play particularly well, but they can get over the line. Whether they've got one eye on Vegas, I think you'd have to say that if you're a player, as much as everyone's saying we're focused on this week, you don't want to be getting injured or suspended and miss out on a trip to Vegas. But ultimately, they've played 2-1 Warrington, and that's that's what you want.
Of course it is, yeah. And what about the Luke Littler effect on Friday night?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. I think I've heard a few people who watched it on Sky who thought it was a bit overkill. Now, obviously, I didn't get that.
He's a great personality, isn't he?
Well, I didn't get that in the ground because obviously I don't see the interviews and the talking that's going on. But for me, they did the branding outside, which was great. There was a bit of build-up, a bit of buzz. They got him out onto the pitch before the game. They got his trophy in the middle. Then they got him out at half-time and walked around to the fans.
And he's a genuine fan, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's a genuine Warrington fan, and you could see that. I mean, obviously the camera kept going to him if you were watching on TV, but there was nothing false about his enthusiasm.
No, he's had a season ticket, and he's a passion. He went to Huddersfield. He went to the Huddersfield game in the terraces for the first game, so it's not like Warrington have just plucked. They're not just jumping on the back of someone from Warrington. I mean, there's not many people from Warrington who've actually done really, really well, so it's like you've got to celebrate it when you can. And the impact he's had on his sport and on young people. My son's 9, he's obsessed with darts now, and do you know what I mean? And I think for the Wolves for Warrington to they always try and move the needle with the marketing, and for them to jump on that, I don't think it's not a cynical ploy. It is a is a realistic.
It's really creative, actually. I mean, Warrington are a creative marketing team, aren't they? The only thing that sometimes disappoints me is that they don't sell out the stadium a bit more often, because it's a 15,200, I think, and they've not come that close to selling it out, have they, in the last few years?
They had it extended. I think they filled the corners in, didn't they, a few years ago? I think they had a sellout against Widnes, actually. I think 2016 was the last time they probably got there. There was nearly 12,000 in, I think, on Friday, which
is good for Catalans.
Yeah, because obviously Catalan only have a handful of supporters.
Yeah, well, I wrote a piece in League Express this week saying that, those teams in west of the Pennines, they're all doing fairly well, possible exception of Salford, of course. But, St Helens, Wigan, Lee and Warrington, they ought to be selling out games against each other, in my opinion, pretty soon. Wigan got 21,000 and odd against Lee, which is approaching their capacity. I think it's 25.5, isn't it? So they've got the toughest job to do to sell out because it's a bigger stadium. But, Warrington, 15,200, Saints, 18,000, Lee, 12,000. They ought to be... when they play each other, they ought to be approaching capacity.
Do you think the issue is there's a little bit of overkill in terms of them playing each other so much?
Too many times.
Because Wigan seem to draw Warrington in the cup near enough every year, and then obviously the playoff games, and and then if you're in the loop fixture, you're playing them 3 times, and then you're playing them at Magic Weekend. Is that so? So a Warrington St Helens match might be happening 3 or 4 times a year, which then means that it's harder to sell it out.
Well, I go back an awful long way because sadly I'm very much older than you two guys, and I go back to the 1960s when we had all the 30 teams in one league, and they were split into Yorkshire and Lancashire sections. And as a Wakefield fan in those days, as a young kid, we didn't used to play Wigan very often. We didn't play them every season, but when we did play them, you could guarantee there'd be 26,000 in the stadium as a sellout, because the rarity value actually added figures to the crowd.
Well, Sam Burgess actually said on the Warrington Media Day, he made this exact point where he said, if we only played Hull KR once at home in the season, the fans are going to want to turn out to see Mikey Lewis, as an example. And he's saying we've got to do some work on that to make it, instead of him coming twice a year and you'll pick and choose, is make it like that's the only time you're going to see him this year, so come and see him.
Yeah, and to build it up, to build up your opponents, that's the whole point, isn't it?
Well, St Helens have drawn Leeds a few times in the Challenge Cup. They played them back-to-back last year because of the way the draw fell. So, there's definitely a bit of fatigue there. We'll move on to the other matchup on Friday night. Wigan 46 defeated Hull FC 4. Yeah,
and that was so disappointing, really, for me, because, Hull got a great crowd there, about 15,000 and something, didn't they? And after that great win in Catalans, you were hoping that Hull would put up a sterner resistance against Wigan. But it was back to the old Hull, wasn't it, of getting hammered at home. And I was sort of thinking, God, it wasn't a great idea to make their first home game against Wigan when they're trying to rebuild under a new coach. Sometimes I think the fixture planners don't sort of do some clubs many favours, really. So Hull will have to recover from that, but they were well and truly beaten, and Wigan were rebounding from that 1-0 defeat by Lee, weren't they? And Jay Field scoring 3 tries. He was our Player of the Week in League Express, which you would imagine he would be with a hat-trick. But did you see that game, James?
I've seen the highlights of it. I've seen the full one.
Yeah, I mean, there were some great highlights, actually, weren't there?
You've got to say. Nice to see a scrum play.
Yes, of course, yeah.
There's been a number of wingers making breaks down the outside and kicking back infield that has resulted in a lot of tries to start the season.
Yeah, Liam Marshall kicking infield for Field. Brilliant.
He got a perfect bounce too, didn't he?
Well, if you take risks, sometimes they come off, don't they? And he did in that case.
Yeah, no, but they still look as dangerous as ever, Wigan. So we'll move on to Saturday's matchup. We had Leeds 32 points, defeating Salford 6. Not the best return to full strength Salford could have hoped for.
No, but I wasn't too surprised by that because I thought, with Salford getting off to a slow start to the season, their players obviously hadn't played the previous week. I thought they might not be battle-hardened enough to beat Leeds, even though they scored a very early try, and it looked promising early on, but Leeds just pulled away from them, didn't they?
Yeah, and you talk about fixtures. I'm sure Salford play Leeds at home again in a couple of weeks as part of the fixture quirks.
The loop. I mean, that just seems crazy to me. If that's true, I've not looked at the fixtures that carefully, but if you're going to have loop fixtures, have them the first 4 games of the season and the last 4 games of the season. For goodness' sake, don't play them, in such a short space of time.
Or as we're big advocates for, let's shorten the season. They're playing way too much rugby league.
They are.
The season.
We are playing too much.
Yeah. Moving on to the second matchup on Saturday, we had St Helens 46 points, defeating Cass 6.
Well,
bit of a shellacking.
It was an interesting game, wasn't it? Because I thought Saints really showed a lot more adventure in, they were throwing the ball around a lot more than they probably would have done last season. I mean, that may be because Castleford weren't strong opposition and they felt that they could do that and so on. But I just get the feeling that Lee Breer's fingerprints are starting to emerge on that St Helens side. Do you get that feeling, James?
I commentated on the game actually, and I thought Jack Welsby was brilliant. I thought he was outstanding.
Oh, it's brilliant full-back, yeah.
Joining the play both sides. He's good with he's good running with the ball. He's good kick. He's put some good kicks in. He was good passing. They've got the little three of them on the right hand side. They've got Harry Robertson, the young player who's playing at centre, and Tristan Saylor. The three of them look like if they get hot this season, they're going to create some really spectacular tries.
Tristan Saylor looks a very good signing, doesn't he? In the early days, anyway.
Yeah, and especially because Johnny Lomax is he's a very steady, high quality player. So it means that they know they can depend on him to organise the team and that then means that Saylor can do a bit. We saw that little back heel thing that believes illegal, but that rule needs changing if that's the case. But he can do some more of that off the cuff stuff that might help open teams up that perhaps Saints haven't quite managed to do as well in the last season or so.
Yes, absolutely. What do you think of Castleford? I mean, after that Hull KR performance, everybody thought, gosh, Cass aren't as bad as everybody thought they would be, but maybe they are, who knows.
I mean, they did, when they were 14-0 down after 14 minutes, I thought it was going to be a shellac, and they did well, actually, to dig in. It was interesting because my thing on it was they went into the Hull KR game with zero expectation, didn't they? Because they'd lost to Bradford.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, then they go into the Saints game where people are, actually, there's a little bit of expectation back because they did so well with Hull KR, and then now it's sort of it wouldn't surprise me if Castleford actually play well this week because they've sort of gone back down to that zero expectation again. I think you've got to be honest. If you look at their squad, it looks weaker than every other squad in the Super League.
Well, they've got a lot of players who haven't played at either Super League or NRL level before, haven't they? They've obviously got a lot of Papua New Guinea players, and the thing is, last year, Liam Horn was an unknown player who I thought was outstanding. So that there are nuggets of gold to be found in, if you look below the top level in Australia, and PNG players in particular, will often you can often find a player who will be outstanding, can't
Jeremiah Simbikin. I think he was playing in the back row.
He looks very promising
with the headgear.
Sylvester Namo came off the bench. I thought he had a decent impact. Got a try as well. And that's like you say, Martin. Sometimes if you can get some of these players that are perhaps unknown, but they actually turn into something. It actually works quite well. It's just at the moment when you look at it on paper, you're not sure whether that's going to happen.
Some work and some don't. That's the thing. But hopefully they're getting better at picking those who do work.
I think also with St Helens, you look at the way Wellesby's playing at the moment. The amount of try assists he's had, he must have 8 to 10 try assists in the first two matches. You look at what Lee Breers did with that Broncos attack. The first player that was unlocked was Reece Walsh. Like how far his game came under Lee Breers, and I think now we're starting to see that with Wellesby in his play. So watch out the rest of the comp. I think they'll go a long way this season if they can keep this.
I think Saints. I'd say they're the second favourites after Wigan, personally.
And then we had Sunday's matchup. Lee 24 points defeating Huddersfield 10.
Huddersfield 6-4 up at half time, looking very good in the first half, but Lee came out, in the second half and were just a bit too strong in very blustery, wet, horrible conditions, weren't they? Huddersfield were playing into the teeth of a very strong wind in the second half and rain and so on, and I think Lee were just able to take advantage and came through. But Lee 2 wins out of 2. It was quite interesting, isn't it? Because last year they didn't get their second win until about the 8th game, so they're already well ahead of where they were last year.
Yeah, and they've announced, haven't they, the deal for Edwin Apape, which is a big fillip for them.
Yeah.
You talk about players who perhaps were relative unknowns in terms of the top level, and he's an absolutely fantastic player.
It wasn't just unknown, but I think he'd been in a bit of trouble in Australia, hadn't he? I forget now what it was. It was sort of I think had he walked out on the PNG Hunters, or the PNG Hunters had sacked him. Something had happened.
From memory, so the Queensland Cup coach, he was actually my coach in university, Matt Church, and I don't know if I was talking to Edwin after a match one day or Matt Church back in Australia, but he didn't get picked in that PNG Hunters team in the Queensland Cup, so he's a bit of an outcast. And then I think Adrian Lamb, with his dealings, the PNG international side, knew who he was.
Nipped in and signed him.
Brought him over, and he hasn't looked back since.
No, it's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely
it's great,
brilliant.
and it's great for Lee that, his 6-year deal. I think it's great that they can say, we can build a team around him, and that's what they have done successfully over the past few years. And
That's
it's great
right.
for them that they've got that. For me, hooker's the key position in the game. They've got the cornerstone of their team nailed down, so they can build the rest around him.
Absolutely, yeah.
They've sort of taken that Wigan method, haven't they? A bit of insurance for if an NRL club comes knocking. There'll be a healthy buyout. But so that sort of wraps up the weekend's matches. Just David Armstrong as well.
Well, David Armstrong scored a brilliant try, which we made the try of the week, when he supported Gareth O'Brien. Gareth O'Brien, an underrated player, in my opinion, by the way, playing at standoff, put him into a scoring position, but Armstrong's pace to, go those final 20 metres was fantastic, I thought, and it was just a superb try to watch. I also think Keenan Brand is starting to play really well for Lee as well, after that Love Island experience, which sort of set him back a bit in terms of his rugby league career. But I think Keenan Brand's looking a really, good player in that Lee backline, and that it's great to see players coming through, isn't it, like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you sort of touched on it in your article this week, James, about building the profile and brand of some of our players. Maybe that's a good approach. Maybe we should get a few more boys on Love Island.
There'd be a few volunteers, wouldn't there?
Yeah. But that sort of leads into the articles you both have written in League Express this week. James, we might touch on yours first, mate. You had a nice piece just talking about the Luke Littler Stadium and just more or less how we sort of market the game. Do you want to touch on your article and sort of explain to the viewers what you wrote about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I tied it into the Luke Littler thing where, of course, he's got a massive profile. Probably, listen, you're not going to be able to replicate his profile. You'd probably struggle to find a comparative example to Luke Littler over the past maybe even 20 years. But I think that the point was made that in rugby league we seem to try and the best we can do is seemingly jump on people who are interested in rugby league. So, you'll see it, the Mason Mount thing at the Wigan game. I know they did a little bit there. If Stuart Pearce is in the crowd at Warrington, the Sky cameras will find him.
Yes.
And I remember interviewing Martin Afire a couple of years ago, and he sort of made the same point to me, really, where he said, look, I retired 20 years ago, and yet whenever there's anything remotely rugby league related on the TV or cutting of a ribbon or something, he still gets the call to be invited. And don't get me wrong, legend of the game, Martin Afire, but he was making the point, well, there must be someone more modern than me or that we can put up there. And I'm not sure why. The society's a lot different. People don't know who the England cricket team is anymore, the England rugby union team particularly.
No.
Whereas, when I was a kid in the 90s, everyone knew that was because there was a lot more prominent. And so it's difficult because it's not quite the same. When people say if it's on terrestrial TV, people know they are. They won't. It's a different,
it is different.
It's a different sort of thing. But does rugby league do enough to put George Williams at the forefront of whatever they're doing?
No.
I saw a good. This is probably a bad example, and I know Adam at Warrington, the media man, so he can shout at me privately. But for instance, they were doing good luck messages for Luke Littler ahead of the darts. The video in Warrington, and there was people in Warrington giving up. And with all due respect, Warrington chucked up Aaron Lindop to give the good luck message. Well, why are you not putting George Williams up to do things like that?
Or even Sam, that's the point.
And that's probably a poor example. But I don't know whether as rugby league contracted to a point where there's almost like a bit of paranoia amongst some clubs. Maybe.
Well, there's also another factor, and that is that a lot of clubs don't want their players to have a high profile. I can guarantee that if we, on this podcast, if we phoned up any Super League club and said, we'd like your star player to join us on the League Express podcast, I suspect that they would not allow it, and for no good reason, but they're almost nervous about their players having a high profile, aren't they? And I'm never quite sure why. But rugby league seems an almost unique sport in that sense, that we, that the clubs try and prevent their, Every club has a media manager, and I sometimes sort of think that their job is to stop the media from talking to players as much as facilitate access to them.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of examples where we just haven't. I use the example, they brought the trading card thing out recently, and I've been banging the drum about that for years and years. Where my son's obsessed, football cards and stuff like that. It's all these extra things that raise. People, my son is obsessed with football, but that's largely through video games and playing stuff like that and collecting the cards. He knows more about that through engagement stuff like that. Whereas if you think for young rugby league fans, they've not had that engagement point of they don't get a George Williams card in their hand. They can't swap it with their mates. There's none of that going on.
No.
And Super League is surely big enough to be able to do little things like that.
Of course. But isn't that something that IMG should be recommending that we do?
I mean, I guess so. They're doing it at the moment. They've launched it recently. I don't think it was a great launch. I think, you've got to buy individual cards for £5, and I'm like, well, you're not buying a card for £5 and then trading it with someone. The whole point of a trading card pack is you buy a pack of cards, and if you get a swap, you'll swap it with someone else.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's little things like that for me that are that helps build the player pro. I want a Mikey Lewis, or I want a Jai Field card, whatever. That for whatever reason over the last 20 years, rugby league has just stood still in that department and not done it.
Well, it's interesting, James, that the RL Commercial is currently advertising for a new full-time marketing and commercial executive. You sound like the guy to me. You ought to be in there, mate.
It sounds like you're pitching to be my agent, Martin.
Well, I wouldn't mind, if you got the job. But, but we do need somebody with imagination and the ability to spot opportunities, don't we?
And it's a typical rugby league. Everyone seems to be fighting with each other, don't they, in rugby league most of the time. It's, my gantry's bigger than your gantry, and we've got more seats than you. And, rather than taking a step back from that, you're competing on the pitch and stuff, but let's look at, what things can we do collectively that will grow again? Wigan and Warrington going to Vegas this week, and Wigan's approach is that we're doing this to grow the wider game. It's like the criticism of the Salford thing in round one was Salford can have their own bee in the bonnet with the RFL or whatever, but ultimately, did they have a responsibility for the game as a whole, given the context of that game and the broadcast? Little things like that perhaps is lost because rugby league's fighting with itself so often.
Yes.
We don't see the bigger picture.
I think
a lot of finger pointing, that's for sure. But for me as a kid growing up, that's how I learnt about rugby league players, was through the playing cards. And we used to, you'd buy a packet of crisps, and inside the packet of crisps they'd have a wrapped up little trading card, and we'd collect those and take them to school in our big folders. And if you had a spare of something, you'd trade with someone else. And that's how we knew all the players' names. And then you'd start watching it on TV, and you'd go, I know who that is.
I've done it with Warrington Sounds, my local football team. They're in the sixth tier. We've released trading cards this year and can't get them printed quick enough. And we get 1,200 or 1,300 fans at games. So there's not a huge fan base there to go at, and yet it makes money. I've ran it all from start to finish, and the kids. I see kids with folders of them at the games, and they're waiting for the players, waiting for them to get signed after the games and stuff like that. And it just builds a connection between the fans and the players that perhaps it's not like the sorry Martin, it's not like the olden days where you can't run on the pitch and get the tie-ups and stuff anymore, or you can't stand at you can't sit on the wall at the front of the stand anymore, so you don't get that close connection with them. So it's like you've got to look at ways that how can we get that connection with them that makes them
young people in particular. That's the point, isn't it? If you don't connect with young kids, then ultimately your future's not secure, is it? Let's face it.
That's right. James, how do you see, I guess, the landscape at the moment in terms of marketing the game? Do you think we're starting to begin on a bit of an upward trajectory, or do you think we're still perhaps declining or at a stagnant point?
I think it's difficult because when you're in rugby league, we all love the game and we're obsessed with the game, but it feels like on the outside it's quite anonymous to
nobody gives a damn.
Yeah, and I think we've almost got to accept that that's the case and try and make the best of what we have. I think sometimes we're a bit too fantasist in terms of we think of hypothetical things that we might get and that we could get, and that if we do this we might get. Well, it's like, well, let's not deal with hypothetical things. Let's deal with what we've got and play to our strengths. Hull KR, as an example, I think that's a great place to go. What they've done there over the past few years has been great. I think some people will align that to IMG. I think that's very unfair on Hull KR because I think they've got to do it. And I think, looking at the IMG thing, IMG ultimately are telling clubs to do things that the clubs themselves should know that they need to do them things already.
Precisely, yes.
Their businesses, their rugby, the rugby league clubs, whether there's a bit of complacency because of the central funding over the years and clubs have just sort of trundled on. But ultimately, they're running professional sports clubs. They should be doing all of these things, as Hull KR are showing.
Absolutely.
Off their own back. They shouldn't be waiting for someone else to tell them to do that.
Yeah. No, what's great about Hull KR is that they've improved incrementally every year, haven't they? And you see it again this season. They've extended their ground a bit with that the new small stand that they've put in, to fill in the side of the ground and so on. And they've just boosted their capacity to, I think it's 11,200 or thereabouts, and they're filling it. They filled it for the first game, and I've no doubt they'll fill it again this weekend when Salford go. And that's incremental improvement is the way to do it, because you consolidate then, don't you?
Yeah, and they've done some good things with the branding and the merchandise and the offerings for fans, and like I say, they've now got to a point where they've created this demand for tickets that so few clubs in rugby league are able to do, because none of them are getting close to selling out. And, if I remember going to Craven Park when they had that temporary stand behind the goal. They've now got the permanent stand up there. I remember going there in the open end. It's always called Hull KR, but it was particularly cold on the day I went and stood in that open air in probably 2012.
Yeah.
And what's good about that is it's almost like with the new stand you've mentioned there, they're almost like proving the concept before they invest, because they then know they're going to get a return on the investment.
Absolutely.
Obviously, they have the benefit. I think there's also a discussion to be had about the benefit of having your own ground. They've got control over that.
No doubt.
They can sweat the asset. And I think that's where we have...
They get Coldplay coming, can't they?
Yeah. And that's I think that's probably the difference between quite a few clubs now. Even if you go down into the Championship as well, I do a lot of work with Barrow. The difference between Barrow and Widnes, for instance, is that Barrow control their own ground. So they've got a lot more opportunities to generate, rather than effectively when you're a part-time club who don't own your own ground, you're basically just renting a facility and turning up and playing there.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, definitely. Now, Martin, in your column, we sort of touched on a few things already, but you're a bit angry over the short dropouts we've been seeing.
Short dropouts? Why do people do them? We saw last season when Mark Sneed did that famous short dropout to Jake Wardle, who just sort of said thank you and I'll score a try. And Hull tried a short dropout. Tom Forber picked it up and scored in pretty similar circumstances. And we've seen it, several, times this season. Short dropouts end up with either a try to the opposition or 6 more tackles to the opposition on your own line. Why do it? I know the rule has been changed, so it's
not a penalty.
It's not a penalty anymore. It's a play of the ball. But so what?
But it doesn't matter anyway, because even if you got, I suppose you'd take the 2, I guess, in certain situations.
Yeah.
I asked the exact same question actually on Saturday in the commentary. It's like, well, why were people not doing it? If it was a thing, why were they not doing it 10 years ago or 20 years ago? There's a reason why people weren't doing short dropouts 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
20 years ago.
Get the ball as far from your own line as you can.
I saw one of the accounts on Twitter say this actually about, well, if teams are going to go for short dropouts this regularly, why don't they go for short kickoffs more? The risk and reward is a lot, the risk is a lot less of a short kickoff.
Well, when Leeds had Rowan Smith as the coach, they used to do a lot of those, but again, very often they didn't come off. So it was an oddity. Rowan was very much a pioneer in that sort of advocating short dropouts at kick-off and from under your own post. But I never saw the advantage.
I don't mind it when a team's chasing points. They desperately need the ball back. Obviously, you've got to try everything.
That's the exception, probably, isn't it? Yeah.
And I guess as a neutral, when you sit on the sidelines and you're watching, there's a bit of excitement about who's going to get it, but it needs to be. They need to be working on this at training. Have someone sitting on the try line in case it does go south, just to make that cover tackle if the receiving team, gets through.
Yeah. But so often as well, you see they do a short dropout. It doesn't even go 10 metres. So you're conceding possession.
That was the thing with the Sneed one last season. They were up, I believe, on the scoreboard when he did it. So it just made no sense, didn't it?
Yeah.
But and then you also touched on the NRL's financial strength. There's been a few figures reported over the past couple of days.
Well, they do seem to be going from strength to strength. I mean, Peter Vlandis is talking about, becoming $1 billion a year industry. I think they're, about $761 million, their income.
Yeah.
At the moment, with a significant surplus. I forget the figures, 60-odd million surplus, I think it is. It's funny, really, when you look at the NRL, because when COVID came, there were some people saying that COVID was going to kill the game in Australia, and Vlandis sort of took control of it and brought it back very quickly, as you recall. And ever since then, it seems to have gone from strength to strength, which is quite remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think he said it was the 4th year in a row of a surplus now.
Yeah.
They've bought a heap of assets as well in the past couple of years.
And they're still talking about, investing in British Rugby League, although they've, no approaches have been made apparently. But who knows what might come about?
It was interesting, the comments that you put in your column from Vlandis saying that they'd be interested. It's just whether, we'd come to the party over here. What do you think, James?
I think actually a former club CEO actually said to me, I remember a conversation vividly, probably 10, even 15 years ago, where he said to me, the best thing that could happen for Super League is to become NRL Europe. And that was, we're talking 10, 15 years ago. I think the problem you always have at the moment, is it the RFL? Is it RL Commercial? Is it Super League? There's a little bit of that. What is Super League as an entity, really?
What would they be buying, in other words?
Yeah, it's just a collection of 12 clubs, but it's not the same 12 clubs, is it? Because the 12 clubs can change. No. I think it was almost like when there was a talk about Eddie Hearn, and that's a different debate. The problem you have at the moment is effectively Super League is made up of 12 completely independent
Absolutely,
businesses.
yeah.
And ultimately, if someone comes in and wants to buy Super League, well, effectively, them 12 individual businesses have got to agree, because if you go to St Helens and say we're going to do it this way, well, the St Helens might turn around and say, well, actually no, because our business might fall apart if we do it that way.
Well, I suppose what they'd do is buy a majority stake in Super League Europe, which is the company that all the Super League clubs have a stake in. They all have a 1/12th stake, or a 1/13th stake, actually, because I think the RFL has a 1/13th stake as well, and they could potentially buy a majority stake in that company, couldn't they?
They could, but does that mean that the clubs are going to listen?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on, the thing is that at the moment there is no real control over the clubs. The clubs can do whatever they want, even if that means not presenting a unified face in terms of branding and so on. And what we need to do, I think the trouble with Super League is it's dramatically lacking in the sort of branding that other major sports would tend to have. If you look at any Super League match played, broadcast on Sky, the pitch is absolutely bare. There's virtually no branding shown on it. The strips are, very diverse, not any sense of consistency among them, and so on. So, it's something like when you watch, say, American football, if you watch the NFL, you know immediately what you're watching, don't you? And you know the distinction between the NFL and college football as well. It's slightly different uniforms that tell you what it is you're watching.
Yeah, I watched a documentary a bit ago on the formation of the Champions League in football, and that was one of their big things. And if you go to a Champions League match, every stadium is covered in the Champions League branding. They have the thing on the pitch for the game. They have the theme tune, all that sort of thing. And it's like you say, do you feel like if the NRL was to buy, do you feel like it's salvageable? Is the only solution to basically say, I'm not advocating a breakaway, but is the only solution going to be to set up something new and say, right, we're creating NRL Europe, Wigan, Warrington, do you want to come and part this? These are our terms. Do you want to come on board? Yes or no?
Well, that would be an incredible thing to do, wouldn't it? To create something entirely new and to invite the leading clubs to join. And bear in mind, you could almost, given the struggles that a lot of leading rugby union clubs are going through at the moment, you could almost invite them as well to cross codes and create a truly national game.
And and the thing is that you're talking about finances there. You're getting to the point where the rugby clubs in this country are actually going to be quite easy to tempt if you've got a little bit of cash. Like we've seen with the 100 in cricket.
Oh yeah.
I think some of them 100 franchises now are going for like £60 million.
They are. They're very fortunate that the major. There's such a lot of money in India at the moment, and they're cricket mad, and the companies behind the Indian Premier League are buying 100 franchises. Yeah. We don't have that.
But then that's almost like the NRL example. Yeah. I mean, not to them levels, but you're almost at the point if you put £5 million on the table, a lot of them Super League clubs their ears are going to go up.
Oh gosh, yes.
Because at the moment,
well, that's what happened in 1995 when Murdoch came, because the clubs were broke at the time, and Murdoch offered riches and millions of pounds and so on, and they couldn't afford to say no, could they? Money talks.
I'd love to see the money that the NRL would be able to put aside for a marketing budget as well. Put the brand in the people's faces. And
but the 100 is a really interesting example because it's played in 1 month during the month of August. And lots of games played in that in that period by 8 teams altogether. And the rugby league equivalent to that would be to set up a separate, say, a nines competition played throughout the month of July, with say 8 teams having, or maybe even 16 teams, having events on a regular basis, several nights a week or whatever, and just have the whole focus of the game on that tournament in that month.
I mean, nines. I'm not a massive fan of nines just because I think that the game, the sport as it is fine as it is. Cricket, the reason why the 100 and 2020 cricket works is because the longer versions of the game are probably a bit too long for certain people, so it's a short version. But having said that, I remember was it at the 2017 World Cup when they did the Nines World Cup before it? There is something. It's good to be able to watch. If you can play a couple of games and you can see back-to-back games, and your team's playing 2 or 3 games.
It's just 20 minutes, 10 minutes each way. That's in a period when people have shorter, attention spans. 10 minutes each way might be a great solution, mightn't it?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you'd be like, right, you can see your team play a couple of times on that evening.
Absolutely. As well as seeing some other teams as well.
Whereas, like with the Magic Weekend, as an example, if your team's on first, you probably watch your team, you might watch 10 minutes of the next game and you think, I'm going to slow it off. Whereas if your team are playing once and then they play again in an hour.
Well, if you had a nines event where at each event there were 4 teams and they played each other, so there were, team 1, 2, 3 and 4, you'd be there for the whole of the evening then, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Waiting for them to play each of those teams in turn. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I personally think it's a format that's waiting to be exploited, personally.
Mm. Yeah, we'll wait and see.
Whether anybody ever will, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I'm sure there'll be a few more reports circulating around the NRL's interest following the Vegas weekend. I'm sure there'll be a few key stakeholders.
Well, there'll be a few people talking in Las Vegas, won't there, this weekend? And who knows what's going to come out of that.
Absolutely. Just some of our news topics. A bit about Sam Burgess and his visa. Do you think he'll get his visa on time to head over to Vegas?
Who knows?
He was pretty open and candid in the press conference on Friday. He told us the situation and where he'd been at. He was quite confident of getting there on time. I actually saw a picture of him last night at the train station in Warrington. There was a few Warrington fans around him getting on the train to London, so I assume that he might be going back to the embassy to try and sort it out, but I'm sure then.
But why didn't he get that visa fixed up 6 months ago?
Well, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it, Martin?
I mean, it seems odd to, be in this position where it's only a few days before the game and it's still not fixed up.
My conspiracy theory that I just came up with last night, and it means nothing. It's like Sam Burgess clearly is going to be wheeled out for everything when he's over there. I partly wonder whether he's thought it'd probably be better for me if I can just get out there on the Friday and Saturday and not have to go through all these. The NRL press are going to be all over him and stuff like that.
Well, I think there's a media conference today on Zoom. And Martin Gleeson's going to be the man who's fronting it, isn't he?
Right. It'd be interesting to see what NRL journalists shot for that compared to whether it was Sam.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, fingers crossed. I'm sure he'll get over there. They'll be deploying all resources to make it happen.
I'd be surprised if he didn't.
And the other one, Willie Isa, he's signed on as a player support and development role at Chelsea.
That's very interesting, isn't it? I wonder how that came about. Yeah. We've not really been told, have we?
No, well, they always talk about his role in establishing that Wigan culture and what he's done to maintain that. So
good luck to him. I bet it's hopefully he's going to have a successful career down there.
No, absolutely, and it's definitely not what we were sort of talking about. We thought he might have another playing opportunity elsewhere, but
who knows?
I'm sure plenty of Widnes fans wouldn't have minded him coming to have another stint at Widnes.
No, I'm
his
sure. His
partner plays in the Women's Super League, so he's obviously built connections. Through that way, but I think again, rugby league stuff like that. We are quite, there's really good characters, really good. The process behind a rugby league team and the players and the discipline and everything that they go through is actually something that other sports do admire.
Of course they do.
And we probably don't make enough of a song and dance about it because you do hear when you come across people who've engaged with rugby league professionally, whether it's another sporting club, they're all almost in awe of the science behind it, the strength of the players and stuff like that. And maybe as a sport, we don't do enough to show off that.
We don't shout, do we? We don't shout about the game, really. That's the trouble. And the people. I mean, my criticism, James, is aimed at the people who run the game because. I mean, we all know at the moment that Simon Johnson, the chairman of the RFL, is under strong pressure and may well be voted out of office on March the 12th at the next Rugby League Council meeting. But the trouble is, people like Simon, who are very good at chairing meetings, I mean, Simon's a very capable guy, but they don't have a strong media presence promoting the game, do they? That's the problem. And Tony Sutton, the chief exec of the RFL, most people wouldn't recognise him if he walked into, if he was on our podcast. Most people wouldn't know who he was.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it the last few years. There's a lot of governance in rugby league. It's over elaborate governance.
Yes,
you've got, especially in the international game as well. And there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of meetings going on, and there's a lot of chairing of meetings going on, but there's not a lot happening. How many years were we waiting for the rugby league calendar, the international rugby league calendar? Well, how many meetings and things have they had in that time?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I understand that it's probably difficult to arrange them sorts of things, but I do think that at times the governance of the game ties itself in knots and it takes away that focus, as you say, from the marketing and the commercial side. And Vlandis is, as a character, he's got critics and he's got supporters, but ultimately he gets attention.
He makes news. That's the point.
Angles, yeah.
He's the nearest person we ever had to Vlandis was Maurice Lindsay, who was always quite prepared to go up front, be interviewed on TV or radio, whatever, or be in the newspapers, promoting the game. Now, I always was falling out with Maurice because Maurice was a very controversial character, but you've got to hand it to him that when he was in charge, he did get rugby league a lot of publicity that it doesn't seem to get now.
Well, I also think that the RFL, I mentioned this in my column as well, the RFL get a lot of criticism, and sometimes it's unfounded, sometimes it isn't.
Oh, yeah.
But if you actually fought fire with fire, I think you'd actually do much better for the game, like the Salford situation.
Yeah.
They didn't say anything.
No, they've still not put out a statement about Salford.
Well, why didn't they come out and say, this is exactly what's happened? And even if they were in the wrong, at least then, and don't get me wrong, people were talking about it, but that would have added, it probably would have fueled the fire even more and got it even more attention than it
Absolutely,
got.
yeah.
And I've thought for a long time that the RFL should be a lot more proactive in addressing criticism that they receive. I'm talking like, I'll see loads of nonsense written about, on fans forums and on social media.
Yeah.
Oh, the RFL this, the RFL that. Well, they need to correct them things, but then also what that means is when stuff does happen, they need to come out and be strong about it.
Of course they do, yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Incidentally, I believe they are going to reveal the Ashes Test match venues on Sunday, which is something to really look forward to, isn't it? And hopefully we might see some really interesting venues revealed.
You've heard a few whispers, James?
Yeah, well, we're hoping one will be at the new Everton ground on the Albert Dock.
I shall certainly go to that game. Hopefully,
Everton are only going to start playing there in August. Their first competitive game, so it'll be still fairly new. There'll be a lot of people wanting to go. You would imagine tickets for the football is going to be hard to come by, so it might help drive ticket sales for the Rugby League.
What it would mean is that a lot of Liverpool FC fans could go to Everton and see what it's like without having to support Everton.
That'd be a good. That's a good
selling
marketing.
Point.
There's the marketing done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a shame. Obviously, it's not earlier. We're how many months are we away now? 7 or 8 months. There's always that criticism that could the games be announced earlier, but it's important. It's the first Ashes series for 20 years. Rugby league as a sport has got to get behind it.
The real question is, will Wembley be among the venues? That's traditionally. It was at one time, wasn't it? We used to go to Wembley for the first game. Will they be confident enough to do that this year?
It's crazy, really. I only have vague recollections of the early 90s, but it is mad when you watch the videos on YouTube of Great Britain, Australia at Wembley, because you think, wow, it feels like we're a million miles away from that at the moment. Do you think that'll be the case? Do you think there'll be a game in London, whether it's at Wembley, whether it's at is it at the London?
I honestly don't know. At
the London Stadium, maybe.
But I think there might be. I wouldn't rule it out. The RFL is, being, obviously guarded about this. They want to make a big splash when they announce it on Sunday, and who can blame them? I mean, I think they're going to announce it on the back of the Vegas weekend, when Rugby League's going to be obviously in the news, and I think that's a pretty wise move on their part. So it's something certainly exciting to look forward to. I suspect there will be a game in London, but I'm not sure it will be at Wembley. It might be at Tottenham or Arsenal. You would think, wouldn't you? And but who knows?
And then what you think in the third one would be a Yorkshire
or even Newcastle, perhaps. Who knows? I wouldn't. Hard to say, really, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of potential venues, but if you're talking about big venues, you really, and Everton is about 52,000, isn't it? The new Everton Stadium. That's a similar size to St James's Park in Newcastle. Or who knows? They might go to Etihad Stadium in Manchester.
Yeah, what if they are teeing it up with the Vegas thing, like you say? Maybe there's a bit more NRL involvement in the promotion because with it being England, Australia. I think one of the struggles we've had for so long over here is that it's been an England series, hasn't it? And we've not had perhaps the external support to drive it. Maybe with it being Australia, maybe the NRL are really bought into it.
Well, who knows? Yeah. And I mean, if they were hoping to get some Australians coming over, then playing in stadiums like Everton would be a big thing, wouldn't it? They'd want to play it in some venues that people would want to visit.
Do you think the priority for a series like this is to make money, Martin, or is it more about breaking even?
Well, it's certainly not to lose money. That's one thing for sure. I mean, the World the World Cup in 2022 was a massive disappointment because it did lose money. We were told beforehand that it was a great opportunity to have a profitable tournament, to make money off the back of it, and of course we were given £25 million by the government. So, for that tournament to lose money was almost inexcusable, really. And we can't afford to lose money again, can we?
Does it make it difficult for the finances using the football grounds, but then at the same time, to put England and Australia at Headingley or at St Helens, which are, within rugby league, if you like, does it make? Is that what? Do you feel like that's what's making it difficult to make money for the game because we've not got our own grounds?
Well, part of the problem is that we don't charge high prices really to watch top class rugby league. I always remember a conversation I had with one of the guys who works for us here, who was a keen rugby league fan, but also quite a keen American football fan. And I remember a few years ago, he went to an NFL game at Wembley, and it was about 2 weeks after the Challenge Cup final, which he also went to because Leeds were playing. It was a final that Leeds were involved in. And I said to him, what was the key difference between the two games? And he said, I sat in virtually the same place, behind the posts, for both games. And he said, well, there were two main differences. One was, for the NFL game, you walk down Wembley Way and everything was absolutely dressed for, the whole stadium looked like it was an NFL party. But secondly, I had to pay twice as much for my seat for the NFL game as for the Rugby League Challenge Cup final. And the third thing was that the NFL game was sold out and the Challenge Cup final wasn't. Now, that's the thing. Smart marketing means that you persuade people to pay more for their tickets. It's no coincidence, is it, that Coca-Cola spends about 20% of its income marketing its product, which is why any of us will pay more for a bottle of Coca-Cola, presumably, than for a bottle of cola produced by a local, Brighouse-based pop manufacturer. So marketing pays in the end.
Is the fear driven? You feel like like you said about the Everton ground there, if it holds 50,000. Is the fear driven by rugby league? Almost looks at it and feels daunted at the fact
we can't fill it.
We've got 52, so we can't charge £40 a ticket. We're going to give them away. I always used to use the example of it used to cost me 20 odd quid to stand on the terrace at Wakefield for a regular Super League game, but then I could get a ticket for the grand final at Old Trafford for a tenner. And it doesn't make any sense but it's a tenner at Old Trafford because it's driven by this fear of, well, if we don't make it a tenner, we're not gonna get enough. Whereas maybe there needs to be a reset and an admittance that maybe we are going to have to go back and only have crowds of 20,000, but paying a bit more. And then drive the demand.
Well, there are some people who look at the pricing, and if they see very low prices, the thought hits them that it can't be a great event. If you go and see some of the leading rock bands performing at, venues, major, venues throughout the country, they're charging 200 quid a ticket and more than that, aren't they? And they have no trouble selling out, no trouble whatsoever. People will go and see them who may not be particularly wealthy, but are prepared to pay a fortune for that one-off event.
And there's a bit of a culture, I think, now, isn't there, where the grand final tickets come out at whatever price, and people are like, well, I'll wait until they get a discounted. And
well, if you're going to discount tickets, well, you shouldn't discount tickets anyway, but if you're going to discount them early and then gradually raise the prices. But you've got to have a marketing strategy that allows you to do that.
Because it's interesting, you mentioned the 2022 World Cup. They actually got a little bit of criticism, didn't they, for their ticket pricing because they tried to go to that but but the trouble is they were trying to charge high prices for games that you knew were going to be one-sided, and that just is a disaster really. And they made the mistake in the World Cup of having 4 groups of 4 that were sort of that pitted very weak teams against very strong sides. The reason why the 2013 World Cup was such a success was because they had 2 what you might call grade A groups and 2 what you might call grade B groups. So most of the games within those groups were very, well contested, and that encouraged big crowds, at the right sort of venues to turn up, and the whole tournament was a success.
much more so than the 2022 tournament.
Yeah, I must admit, I remember the 2013 one a lot more fondly. And if you recall, the coverage of that wasn't great, was it? I think only the big games were on BBC, the rest were on Premier Sports.
Absolutely. But there were games at places like Rochdale where they had the Fijians playing, and even games in Workington, which, I went up to watch Scotland playing, I think it was Tonga in Workington, and, there were great events.
Well, I remember from the last World Cup, the game at Warrington, I think Lebanon played at Warrington, like I say, the crowd was like 5,000 because they got the ticket pricing was too much. And like you say, what you're saying, for England, Australia, fine, charge that, but when it's Lebanon against
you've got to have differential pricing, and it wasn't well done, unfortunately.
Yeah. Right, gents, let's get into our picks for this weekend. Obviously, Vegas kicking off. We've also got round 3 of the Super League. Let's start with the big one, Wigan versus Warrington. Who have you got, Martin?
Well, you've got to go for Wigan, I think, but... who knows? It's difficult because it's a small pitch at Allegiant Stadium, isn't it? There was all that publicity last year, if you remember, where people were saying, "Oh, it's a small pitch, there won't be any tries scored," and so on. And actually, there were lots of tries scored. It didn't it didn't work out the way some people predicted. So who knows what? It's going to be quite interesting to see how many fans are in the ground when Wigan and Warrington kick off, because all the NRL fans, their game kicks off 2.5 hours later. Will they be in? I mean, it's 1:30 local time when Wigan and Warrington kick off. Will there be any NRL fans in the ground at that stage?
Well, it's the whole Magic Weekend. I'm not a massive fan of the multiple games in the day for that reason, because like you say, it's 2.5 hours before the first NRL game, but it's 6 hours or whatever it is before the final one. So you would imagine there's a considerable number of people who want to go to that. So yeah, that is a concern. You're going to have, I don't know, are they saying 10,000 Wigan Warrington fans have gone? Yeah. You're going to have them in the ground, but how is it going to look, 10,000 fans in a 70,000 seat stadium? And that always bothers me about Magic Weekend, to be perfectly honest. It
does, yes. And we don't know how many tickets have been sold for the for the weekend, do we? Because, a few weeks ago they said 35,000, but have they got up to 50,000? They were hoping to, but we're not sure, are we, really, at this stage?
Yeah, that's we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully, because it's the NRL presenting it, you'd like to think that they'll frame it in a way where it looks better. I do think sometimes in this country we don't think of things like that, where we'll broadcast in front of an empty stand instead of, well, let's broadcast to the full stand.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah. Then we have the England women's taking on the Gillaroos straight after.
Well, you would imagine the Gillaroos would be a bit too strong for the England women, wouldn't you? But again, the interesting thing about that game is that both teams will be coming into it pretty undercooked, won't they? Because the NRLW season hasn't started yet in Australia, and it hasn't started here either. So the Women's Super League. So, and it will be only a 70-minute game as well, because they're playing to NRLW rules, which is quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, another can of worms is the different rules that you'll see. You'll see 2-3 different sets of rules on that one evening, because of course Wigan Warrington will play by Super League rules.
Yes.
The NRL women will play by their rules, and then the NRL men will play by their rules.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are they taking Super League officials over, or are they going to be reffed by the NRL refs going?
Super League officials will obviously referee the Wigan Warrington game, but I'm not quite sure. I think the Gillaroos will be refereed by one of the female Australian referees. Tara Jones is on the touchline for that game, as is Liam Moore, I believe. But it will be refereed by an Australian.
Okay. Yeah, cool. We'll wait and see. Then we have the Raiders taking on the Warriors in the third match.
Well, I hope the Warriors do well, because I'm quite a fan of the Warriors, and I think it'd be great for Rugby League in New Zealand for them to triumph. But who knows? It's going to be an interesting game, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you have a pick for that one at all, James?
I think Canberra will win. I think Canberra's one of them teams that, because they've picked up quite a few of the English players over the years, that more people have got a bit of a soft spot for them. So I'll sit there.
Yeah, Morgan Smith is playing for them. Had a bit of a altercation, didn't he, earlier this week?
Storm in a teacup.
Yeah,
by
it was
the sounds,
a storm in a teacup. Yeah,
and some inflatable things they were hitting each other with.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, I think that just goes to show the media landscape over in Australia. Like,
make a big thing of anything.
A sniff of something there. Getting involved and trying to make a storm in a teacup. Then we have Panthers taking on Sharks in the final match.
Well, you'd imagine the Panthers would be too strong for Cronulla, but Cronulla they're a very good side. They've had some good pre-season results, haven't they, I think? So, it's going to be a fascinating game to watch. Nathan Cleary playing for Penrith, though, but now without Jerome Luai beside him. So that's going to be an interesting challenge for him. But I think he will want to shine on the big stage, personally. So, I expect a big game from him.
For you, mate?
Yeah, I think Panthers I think Wigan and Penrith, whatever game that they go into, you're tipping them.
Yes.
I think that's the bottom line with them two teams at the moment. And it's just a shame that
they're not playing each other.
We don't get to see them play against each other yet.
I'm excited to see young Owen Paddy. He's been named in the 14 jersey for the Raiders. I was in the same year level as his brother in school, and he was our dummy half hooker for our school team, and a very talented player himself. But his little brother, I think he was in year 7 when we were in year 12, so our senior year, and he was always like a highly touted prospect from a very young age, and gets to debut in Vegas.
Yeah, why?
Imagine that.
What a fantastic place.
I don't know if he'll get all his family over for it, but
hopefully so.
So great to see him playing.
It sounds to me as though there's some great kids come through your school, mate, in Queensland.
We've got a few.
Harry Grant went to his school.
Yeah. And here he is, sat next to us.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I think, I've said to Jake, we really need to get Harry Grant on this podcast, don't we?
Yeah, I'll have to fly him over.
Will you pay his expenses?
Maybe when they come over at the end of the year, I assume he'll be in that Australian side. I might have to fly back and
yes, I hope you do.
Try and tee it up with him. But yes, St Brendan's College, they've got a few Queensland country boys to the NRL. So then we have some Super League matches as well. We can't forget them.
No.
Thursday night, Hull KR taking on Salford.
I think Hull KR will be too strong for Salford on this occasion. Although Salford are capable of shocking us, aren't they? And they won't have Mikey Lewis, Hull KR, of course, this week. So that's going to be an interesting test for them because, as I've said before, they don't get many injuries, Hull KR. So when they do get a crucial injury like Mikey, even though he's only going to be out for a week or two, it seems now, it'll be interesting to see what they do without him. I assume they'll bring Tyrone May back, and they'll probably partner him with Danny Richardson, won't they, I should think now. So Danny Richardson probably deserves a chance at Hull KR, and, we'll see what he can do. But, it's going to be an interesting challenge for them, I think.
Who do you like in that one, James?
I think you've got to back Hull KR, especially at home. I think it's very hard to read into Salford, but as Martin says, Salford are capable of, as they've shown,
beating anybody on their day.
I think they were maybe a couple of players short last week as well. Maybe if they can get them back, especially in the hooker area, maybe that will help them.
I actually like the combination between Mark Sneed and Jayden Nikorima at halfback for Salford. I think Sneed is the organiser, and Nikorima's a running standoff, and he could do some damage if they can get good ball, I think.
Then we've got Huddersfield taking on Hull FC on Friday night.
That's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think Huddersfield, although they've lost both games so far, I don't think they've been a million miles off, and they might be, they might just be a bit too strong for Hull, I think, on Friday night. But Hull are, after showing all that promise in Catalans, to see them collapsing against Wigan was incredibly disappointing, wasn't it?
Yeah, tough to pick.
Yeah, I think it is a tough one to call. If this game was last week and Hull had gone into the back of it off the first game, you probably would have thought, actually Hull might build a bit of momentum.
Yeah.
I think it'd be quite tight. I wouldn't be surprised if it went to Golden Point, maybe.
Then we have Lee taking on Catalans.
Well, again, Lee have started with 2 wins out of 2. Catalans have started with none out of 2. You would seriously assume that might continue, wouldn't you? And Lee would go would have a third win. And having just signed Edwin Apapi to a new contract, I think the stage is set for him to have a really big game. And I think they'll be a bit too strong for Catalans. I've not seen anything in the Catalans yet that shows. Well, James said earlier at Warrington last Friday, they're lacking attacking threat really, and I don't see them winning at Lee.
Yeah, I have to say, I think Leo win. That's interesting. Pape's been starting on the bench, hasn't he? So maybe he'll get to start on the pitch on at the weekend.
But I mean, they've got two hookers. I mean, Brad Dwyer's a very good guy to come off the bench as well, isn't he? So I think I think Lee are very well stocked in that position.
Then moving on to Saturday, we have Wakefield taking on St Helens.
Oh, good. I mean, Wakefield's my team, I suppose, and but I think St Helens might just be a bit too strong for Wakefield this week. Certainly, judging by the way they played at Castleford on Saturday. If they play like that again, Wakefield have done very well so far, but I don't quite think they've got the quality in their squad that can compete against St Helens. But I'd love to be proved wrong, of course.
Yeah,
I hope it's a close game.
I think it'll be a close game. I think it's a good test for St Helens, to be honest. Obviously, they've had the first two games. People have been saying, "Oh, well, you've not played much." With all due respect to Castleford, I think Wakefield are probably another level above them, especially at home. And so that'll be Darryl Powell can get his teams competing very well. So, I think St Helens will win that game.
And the final match on Sunday, we have Leeds taking on Cass.
Well, you think Leeds looked quite dominating against Salford, although they've lost Cameron Smith to injury, haven't they? And he's a crucial part of their squad. So I don't think it'll be quite as easy as some people might think, but I think they'll win by probably about 10 or 15 points. In that sort of area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always feel like Cass get up for the Leeds games.
They do, yeah.
And so I think it'll be tight. I think it will be close. I think Leeds will.
And Danny Maguire will be very, very highly motivated to do well at Leeds, won't he?
Again, in the early part of the season, it's interesting, isn't it? Because some weeks teams look capable, and then in the next they don't. And after this week will be another one of those. If Casford come and give Leeds a game, you're looking at Casford thinking, well, 2 out of 3 we've competed with two of the better teams. So see how they get on. Yeah,
all right, gents. We've been here for quite a while now. Might look at wrapping things up here, unless there's anything else you want to touch on.
Well, I think we've covered most things. The one thing we've not mentioned, the one player we've not mentioned is Lewis Dodd, who's had a fairly slow start, really, to his life as a South Sydney player and has been suspended for a week. He'll miss the opening week of the NRL season for a tackle. And he was the first victim in the NRL, so to speak, of a new rule that they've got, whereby if you tackle a player high and the player has to go off and then fails an HIA, I think that player then the player who inflicted the damage has to come off the field as well, doesn't he? So you're sort of sent off after the event, and Lewis Dodd suffered that fate and has now been banned for a week. So that's a disappointing start to his. And he's been criticised quite widely by some of the observers in the NRL. So hopefully he'll come back and really show what he can do. I think.
Is it an automatic 1-match ban as well?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, I don't know
to meet with the concussion protocols,
I'm not absolutely au fait with what they've introduced there, but it does look that way. Yeah.
Oh well, hopefully he'll come back hungry and prove everyone wrong in round 2.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, because he's actually a very talented player, but to go and join an NRL club in a playmaking position is quite difficult, really.
No, absolutely. All right, gents, we might wrap things up here. Thanks again for joining us, James, mate. Always welcome back. And, can't wait for Vegas this week.
No, absolutely.
No last-minute flights, Martin? Do you want to go over?
Well,
no?
Unfortunately, I'm putting League Express. The worst thing I ever did was start League Express.
All right, mate. We'll wrap it up here and do it again next week. Hey?
Thanks a lot, Jake.
Cheers, fellas.